to the series Thinking Unbound, where I'm joined by Jonathan Aubrey-Smith and Hasitha Subasinghe from the London Market Practice. Welcome. Yeah. I'd like to talk about the proliferation of data from a specialty London market perspective. And we've seen companies and businesses invest heavily in data in terms of being able to understand and risk and improve their understanding of that risk to become more competitive and gain leverage from that. From a specialties perspective, what is the importance of data and how should it be used in order to gain underwriting advantage?
Interesting question. Some of the common issues with this is, so there's lots of internal data, and then there's the third-party data providers that give you data coming into the portfolio that's relevant to your portfolio. In terms of your internal data, what's missing is how it's structured and how it's not linked exactly to the coverage that you're providing, because a policy may have multiple coverages, and you'll have the details of those coverages, but what you may not have is like the asset detail, quite specific, and what you won't have is things where the claims link to that coverage that links to that asset. You're very likely to have the claim that links to that policy, but you are less likely to have it to the asset. For example, in hull, we can connect a vessel to the policy. That's easy. But we can't connect the claim to the hull. I think the market solved that problem a few years ago, so it's fine. But similarly, in specialty space, in energy, you can connect it to the asset, but you may not be able to connect it to the exact pipeline, exact coverage where it caused the blowout, or if it's a re-drill. So there's this issue of connecting claims with the exposure detail, which is a big problem for internal data.
And how much of that do you think is an insurer's responsibility to solve as opposed to the market's responsibility to solve?
I think it's only for the insurers to solve. I think it's their, for want of a better description, how you effectively solve it is part of your underwriting proverbial secret sauce. I think how you understand, how you capture that data, how you then use that data it's been the core of underwriting for centuries. We're just doing it in a more digitally structured way. Ultimately, it comes back to the knowledge is power piece, and underwriters have been working on that basis since the start of the market, the best part of 350 years ago. Therefore, I think it's for the insurers to understand and work out what's the important information for them. And I think that's part of the challenge with your original question around where are some of the problems. Part of the challenge is I think a lot of the data is being collected, huge amounts of data are being collected, but not necessarily always with the question, with the right questions being asked. i.e., what are we capturing it for? What are we planning to do with it? What is it we're trying to learn or understand? It tends to be, there's a danger quite often that we collect data because we think it's a good idea, it's something we should do, ... And it ends up in a dirty great data warehouse and doesn't necessarily get as leveraged as effectively as it might be, or it gets leveraged sporadically. So I think being really clear about what your goals are in that process, how you can use that data to help your underwriting decision, is absolutely the question you need to start with. And coming back to Has's point around being able to link claims down to the individual asset or pipeline or whatever it might be, is critical, because what we're starting from there is going, I need to be able to know exactly how the claims, exposures and policy information interact so I can then understand how to use that further down the line. So I'm starting at the end and working backwards. Quite often I see you start at the beginning going, well, we should collect the data. Okay, what are we going to do with it? And then that sort of is where it all stumbles slightly. So I think being really clear at that end, what's the goal? How are we going to use it? How is it going to feed into your portfolio management tools? How is it going to feed into your underwriting decisions? Is critical. Then I think you end up collecting the right information for the right reasons, rather than collecting a lot and then hoping something comes out of it.
So let's say we're looking at like a short tail class, like a marine hull account, or specie short tail class. When do we realize we have data issues? Well, we recalibrate our models once every 3 years, roughly. Maybe some will do it a bit more, some will do it a bit less, depending on the resource availability. And when we come around to doing that, then we face the issues of, oh, I can't connect it to the asset. I can't connect, because we've spent a lot of time focused on the exposure information and getting it nice and tidy. We've spent less time on the claims information to link it to. And when we come around to recalibrating models, extracting values from these models so we can make better decisions, that's when we face all the issues of the data and all the things that we could have done 3-4 years ago. So we take corrective action, or we try to change an IT process that has all those information that's wonderful for us. You have to wait another 3 years or another 4 years because you have to collect that information. So it kind of like gets lost in time almost.
Where do you think companies should be developing their systems in order to capture this type of data? So I remember an earlier conversation where you talked about all the nuances of an energy risk and the blowout prevention, whether it was re-drilled, etc., and the need to capture that level of data from a claims perspective, and therefore being able to match it up to the underlying exposure that the underwriter used to underwrite that risk. Is that something that insurers should be looking to plug and wire into their policy administration systems? Should it be an extension to their pricing models? Should it be a different system? What's the practical steps that they should look to do?
I think there's some of it would sit in your pricing tools. Some of it will sit in your. I think it's less about where it sits to start with. It's about how you then pool it. Because ultimately, I think part of the challenge is people are collecting data in their pricing model. They're collecting data in their exposure management tools. They're collecting data in their PAS, with potentially an additional claim sitting in the system sitting on the side that also feeds the PAS. So you've now got, without even trying, 4 core, very powerful data sets that I know a lot of insurers have attempted to conform into one data warehouse with greater or less success. But I think that goal of trying to pull it together, because ultimately it's the relational nature of that information that's key, and that's where the insight comes from. I think part of the challenge is we've kept those data sources slightly distinct because they've been built for a specific purpose. So exposure management tools were there, and they were built with a goal of understanding what your ags are, making sure you're not overlining yourself, etc. Absolutely something that has to happen, but it wasn't initially built about how do you write better business, how do you identify better business, and therefore it wasn't necessarily designed at day one with linking it back to the policy and the claims information. And I think it's thinking, for me, how you move that forward is looking at how you pull the data sets, but looking at how you need to collate and combine those data sources to provide real insight, I think allows you to make the step forward, because otherwise I think you end up making a slightly narrow decision without all the data you already hold.
It's probably because historically, I'm going far back in time now, all the systems are created to generate policies, keep accounts, keep financial records, and it's not driven towards, well, the core function, which is underwriting. The data and systems aren't designed around a company's core function, which should be underwriting. That's the business we're in. We're not in the business of keeping accounts or issuing policies. Issuing policies is a part of it. Technology facilitates it, but the core function should be systems generated around underwriting. Yeah.
And I think that's something that we've seen actually, is that companies have moved away from a one-size-fits-all of having a single underwriting platform which attempts to do your pricing for your energy, your marine hull, your specie, your property all in one go, and actually externalizing those components into specific models which you can then route calls for in order to build up your product or your package that's being requested by the client at that point in time. So that's a really fascinating development that the market's moved towards, and it's really understanding now. Moving on a bit in terms of data, the other thing that we've seen companies invest in is third-party data, whether that's being used to make the process of underwriting quicker through automatic extraction of data characters into pricing models, rating forms, or whether it's supplementing it with kind of additional insight which as an insurer, you don't house that level of insight. What would you say are the practical aspects of improving risk quantification using third-party data?
Okay, so there's a lot of third-party data. If I think about cyber, there's quite a few providers that provide a lot of information. If I think about hull, there's the vessel tracking information coming into play, and quite other third-party providers of data. If I think of energy, there's a lost database that's out there. So there is a lot of data out there. The issue we have is like, how does it all come to one place where an underwriter can make an informed decision? That problem is more accentuated when you have lots of third-party information, like in cyber. How do you make it into one nice dashboard where underwriters can decide, yeah, that's a good risk, I'm going to underwrite that risk at this price. So that's one problem with this third-party data. The other one is actually connecting it to your market space that you operate in, because that data is quite vast, or sometimes not relevant, sometimes US focused. So there's that issue as well.
Thank you very much for an interesting discussion around data in the London market specialty arena. And please join us next time for the next in the series of Thinking About.